Welcome to Porch Play Chat, sponsored by the American Association for Promoting the Child's Right to Play, or more affectionately and shortened title, IPA-USA. IPA-USA is the USA affiliate of the International Play Association, and you can find more about IPA World. IPAworld.org is their website. We started Porch Play Chats as a way to promote play. And I have to tell you, we have found many playful peeps across the United States and world who give us hope that play is going to be more prominent in children's daily lives. And so we focus on a wide range of topics in Porch Play Chats with experts that are just as passionate about play as we are. And so you can find more or find the latest Porch Play Chats by visiting our website at IPAUSA.org. And if you click in the top right-hand corner, it gives you access to our Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube channel. Porch Play Chat is released every Monday on both the Facebook and the YouTube channel. I'm Deb Lawrence, and I'm president of IPA USA. And with me on the porch is Mike Huber, and you will know Mike Huber because he is a regular, and we love having him. Mike is the I know, it's so exciting. Mike is the co-host of the podcast Teaching with the Body and Mind and the author of the book Embracing Rough and Tumble Play. Mike has dedicated his life to serving children and families in the field of early childhood, and he's been an early childhood teacher since 1992. He also has 6 picture books, including the Amazing Erik that you can find on Redleaf Press or Redleaf Lane. Which one is it, Michael?
So Redleaf Lane is an imprint of Redleaf Press. So
perfect, wonderful, thank you. He's presented thousands of sessions on the importance of big body play, and he serves on the board of directors for Child Care Aware in Minnesota and Transforming Families. So Mike, wonderful to have you again. So Mike's going to talk to us today about play and children with disabilities. And so that I think this is a topic that we may not feel real comfortable with because we're afraid of a lot of things. So I'm hoping, what's the adult's role? How do we balance? For all children, not just for typically developing kids.
And so maybe I'll start just saying, so I currently work at an inclusion childcare center. And one thing I'll say right away is that I find that people talk about being inclusive and having an inclusive classroom, but seldom use the word include, right? And the idea is you want to include children. And there are times when you don't, they're being excluded, right? So I think when we start using those terms, it becomes a lot clearer. So, and what I've seen in inclusion classrooms sometimes is there'll be children with different disabilities and children, non-disabled children, but they aren't necessarily all engaged, right? And so I like to think about engagement. And what we find, there's studies that show that children with disabilities have less friends on average than non-disabled children. And, it makes me think too, because I often think being play-based, I often think of, most of my role is stepping back, looking for opportunities to, play with children at times or help children when they're having problems, but trying to be, reflective on myself or like not really critique myself too. Are there times when I'm stepping back when I really should be more active in helping children? The book Amazing Erik, it has a character who's in a wheelchair and actually gets off the wheelchair at one point. And you were telling me a story before we started recording of seeing a child do a similar thing, get off the wheelchair and start playing with kids. But the truth is, for kids who are in wheelchairs that can't get out, other children don't necessarily know how to include those children in play. And the child in the wheelchair doesn't necessarily know how to include others, draw people in. So I wanted to choose a topic that there's no one easy answer
Mhm.
for today's talk, because you have to know the child, obviously, but at the same time, you have to figure out ways to include children rather than, like I said, that's where I feel like when we just say be inclusive, oh, we've got them all in the same room. And now how do we include them in play? And so that's where I think the teacher really does have to actively, find places where they can actively join in. If a child's
Okay.
watching other kids play, and it's like, oh, are you watching them play that game? Did you want to play too? And I guess I have an example from tomorrow. I always like giving example from tomorrow. I'm not that omniscient. An example from yesterday that I saw in a classroom that I thought was such a great example of this. It was with a child who's autistic.
Mhm.
Came in, was watching these kids play a game where essentially it was sort of all the kids were supposed to go to sleep, and the one kid was hiding these gems, these little, blue stones. And then he'd say, okay, wake up, now find the gems. And so this autistic child came in kind of when the game has already happened. So, it was in the morning, and was watching, and then kind of took a little stick, and sort of poked one of the kids. And the teachers just said, oh, did you want to play with them? Hey, you guys, can you tell us the rules? And so then the teacher kind of held the child's hand, the autistic child's hand, so to help him, focus. Okay, we're going to listen to him. And the rules were basically, when I say when I say go to sleep, you close your eyes, right? So then the teacher reiterated, oh, okay, when he says go to sleep, we'll close our eyes. And then he started saying something about the gems, like, they could be anywhere, but, was talking really fast. And she was like, oh, slow down. Can you just tell us, just real simply, what do we need to do? He said, find the gems. It's like, okay. And then said to the autistic child, okay, did you hear that? We're finding the gems. And what she was really doing was attuning both to the autistic child of how to pay attention to these rules, and to sort of physically try them out while I didn't say that out loud, but she was physically showing the child as she was saying the words. And she was helping the non-autistic child also, she was attuned to him. She knows he can talk really fast, and, and so she's okay, I need you to slow down, and that will help him. And she was modeling for them, in a way, it's almost like the way she was scaffolding it. We often think of scaffolding as scaffolding a child with a skill for them. But she was scaffolding for a bridge, that's being built.
That is exactly right. And what a beautiful example of knowing each individual child's gifts.
Right.
And helping them, and helping the child who is not autistic learn how to communicate with the child who is.
Yeah. And true inclusion is all the children are learning how to include each other.
Yes.
And we sometimes miss that. I've probably been guilty of this at times too. Sometimes the phrase inclusion children, right? Meaning the disabled children, and it's like, well, no, everyone's being included,
and we have to really be thoughtful about how we do that.
Yeah.
And not intrusive, and not, say to the child who's autistic, stop poking using that way, right? Instead.
Right. Yeah. So she didn't say that. And then later the child did, it was sort of in between, after they had all found the gems, the child sort of picked up the thing again, like he was going to poke someone. And the kid who had given the rules, who had sort of invented the game or whatever, just sort of said, oh, remember, no weapons. And I loved the way he just a
reminder.
Yeah. He didn't say it in a judgmental way,
right?
But he also knew that he had to say that, as opposed to some of the other kids that had been playing the game for a while. His brother, for instance, he didn't have to tell him that, even though his brother would sometimes poke him. That was a different thing. But, so he was learning to really attune to the different kids. And the way he would talk to one kid would be different than another too. So he was already attuning to each person too. And I know at some point I was watching other things in the room, but on the second or third thing, he was saying, oh, well, he found 2 about the autistic child and he found 3. And, he was keeping track of everyone. And I think, I don't know, it was just really neat to see how they all included each other. And the teacher then was more hummingbird-like, where she would be going to other kids. But then when she, heard something like, oh, I better just go over because, one of the kids might interact. And this is that the autistic child's been in this class for a month and a half now. So not really that long for the kids to learn about each other, figure out how to work with each other. So it takes a while, right? And to learn who, well, one, that he was interested in them, because the teacher picked up on it right away. You're poking at him. You're telling me you want to play with him. Like, that's your way of telling me. And the hard part is there's not one thing you can teach a teacher, right? Like, oh, just whatever. It's more about getting to know, because it could be a child in a wheelchair who it'd be harder to join in right away and is watching and only wants to watch too. But you have to sort of, yes, oh, you're watching them play this game with the gems. Do you want to play too? Right? And asking, and if the child says no, oh, okay, you're just watching. That's another way to engage.
I think the beauty of what you just described is that children have to be imitating that from something that's already happened in the classroom. They're not born able to do that.
Right.
And so when teachers or facilitators, whatever we choose to call them, model and provide prompts so that they can communicate better with each other.
Yeah.
And that opens the door to them practicing that more and more and more, because now they have a skill,
right,
that they can replicate and continue to do with other kids. And I think the beauty of that story is that the way that the teacher approached it was she picked up on the child's cues.
Yep.
She asked a question, or he asked a question, whoever it was.
Yep.
Listened, engaged the other children to engage with him, help them be more directive and shorter in their language so that they learn to communicate. I mean, that's a beautiful story.
Yeah. And I think it's such a great example of it. And the way you, all those steps you said are steps that you could do pretty much in any
situation.
Yeah.
But in order to do that, getting back to what we are always talking about, is a teacher can't be focused on the checklist,
right,
to make that happen, right? Yep. And she has to build a relationship and model appropriate interactions, or he modeling appropriate interactions, in order for children to be able to say, oh yeah, I do that. I mean, it's beautiful.
Yeah, for sure. And it really, and you think about the skills that every single child is learning. And that's the part where I feel like it's everyone. So true inclusion is when everyone's included and everyone's, I was just going to use the word learning, and then it's like, well, I mean, they are learning.
They are.
But it's not a checklist. I guess that's the difference, right? I don't mind using that phrase learning, as long as people don't immediately go to, okay, so what's the checklist? What do I check off with? But more that idea that they're really gaining experience, and they're learning in the context of relationships also, that all learning is in the context
of relationships, right? And if I see someone, I think the beauty of young children is that they're not as afraid of people who may look different or have a different ability than they have.
Yep.
And they're much more accepting of difference. And I think, based on how we handle that, we can knock that right out of them. you know, to where if you're different, it's something to be fearful about, you know, the
Right.
whole piece. And so again, having teachers that are able to see what's happening, picking up on those cues, helping negotiate.
Yeah. And I think one of the things with that word negotiate is that I think for adults, sometimes adults want to have answers.
Mhm.
And I know even when people are play-based, they still can fall into that trap, right? Of, I don't know if I want to do this because I don't know what will happen.
Mhm.
And when you're working with disabled children, each time you're not going to know what's going to work for a particular, is this wheelchair user can get out of the wheelchair and crawl around, this other one can't, and like, you don't know, and do you want to figure it all out? And if you just look at things as a problem to be solved, like, because if it was, say, that same game, but a child in a wheelchair wanted to play, and they were like, oh, but all the kids are laying down to go to sleep. It's like, oh, okay, so what could, whatever Jerry do here? Because he has to stay in his chair,
Mhm.
and they could figure it out, right? The teacher wouldn't have to figure it out, and the teacher shouldn't be afraid to figure it out. I think sometimes people get afraid to even bring up different abilities. So just that idea that you can talk about it and you can solve the problems, and the teacher will be modeling for the kids, or depending how the relationship is, the kids will solve the problem themselves. And if they start to play with each other, they will start to kind of problem solve together. They won't need the teacher or facilitator to necessarily help out with
Need it.
that.
Right,
Yep.
because again, it's been modeled for them and they
Yeah.
have a framework that they can
Yeah.
use. So I have to go back to the previous Porch Play Chat, which is not going to be in order. So sorry, people. But when Angie kept talking about we need to be problem solvers. Children need to be problem solvers. So if there's a problem, well, we can say we're all problem solvers. So what ideas do you have to solve the problem? And if we can get that critical thinking versus waiting for the teacher to answer the problem and to tell them what needs to happen versus allowing them the space to
Right.
bring up ideas and then to reach a solution. Oh my goodness, can you imagine what kind of humans we would have?
Right. And it's interesting because now I did not write down the name of the study, but there's a study on inclusive childcare or inclusive classrooms. I think it was elementary school age, but which classrooms are the most effective? And they used a word that I've never seen, and I tried looking it up and couldn't find it, but it's ad hoc credit. So it sounds like autocratic, but it's ad hoc,
Ad hoc
ADHOC, credit.
Huh,
And it said
never
that
heard of it.
organizations that were ad hoc credit were better at inclusion because the teachers were expected to problem solve around, like, the administrators didn't micromanage. It was more like they were given leeway to problem solve. So then the teachers, that parallel process, when they were working with kids, it was problem solving too, of like, oh, how do we do this game? 3 wheelchairs won't fit in this area, and you all 3 want to play. What can we do?
What can we
Instead
do?
of like, oh, we just can't do it, or we'll have to wait till we go outside. Instead, it was like, oh, it's a problem. And what do we do with problems? We solve them.
Oh, I love it. I mean, I think that is the permission. Teachers don't have to solve the problems.
Right.
They can say, we're all problem solvers.
Right.
What should we do with this? Hey, I don't know if you ever watched the documentary, and now I have to remember what it was called. It's the one with that really amazing pre-K teacher. And she was a bartender at night because her job didn't pay her enough to make bills. What was the name of
I
that?
think I've heard it. I didn't see that one, but
I cannot remember it, but it's the most powerful documentary, right? And I remember she and her co-teacher in this pre-K room acting out a problem and
Right.
a solution. And the children had to come up with the solutions. She took
Right.
my doll and I'm really mad and I want my doll back. What can I do? And it was such a perfect way of engaging children and coming up with solutions.
Yeah. And they're not emotionally involved in it. When it's their doll, it's a lot harder because their, emotional brain is taking
Emotional,
over.
exactly. And so, I think about that all the time. I see that part of that documentary in my head all the time when I'm trying to help my soon to be educators
Right.
recognize teaching strategies you can use to help children become problem solvers.
Yeah.
And I think it's a powerful way for higher education and for coaches in early childhood programs to give teachers the tools that they need to be able to scaffold themselves, right?
Yeah.
Into that sort of mindset of I don't have to solve every problem. Children
Right.
need to learn to solve them. And that whole conflict resolution piece.
Yep. Yeah. And it's so powerful. I feel like even if you think of it for people who are just going into education, what's going to keep you there?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you already know now what you're doing in terms of like you're covering this curriculum and these are, if anything, if a problem comes up, I'll do this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that going to really keep you in the field, or is it going to be like, I don't know. I used to say when I was in the classroom for 28 years, and every single day, I knew kind of what my plan was, or what setup I had, or what new toys were there, but I had no idea what my day would bring ever. Like some days it would kind of just, the kids were just sitting and playing pretty much the way I would have predicted, but there's always something that goes a different way, or two kids who'd never played with each other played together, or the whole room gets turned into a museum, or whatever, like, and that's, I mean, to me, play-based learning, part of it is just like, it lets the teacher be more human, I guess.
It does. And who wants to do the same boring, repetitive thing every day, right? I think that's when we lose the joy.
Yeah.
Not only do I want to write an article on we've lost our way, but I also want to write an article on bringing joy back into the classroom.
Yeah.
It's this fear, and part of that is the way our brain's constructed, right? Our brain's programmed to keep us alive no matter what. So anything that's different, or anything that looks different or acts different or speaks differently, our brain goes, wait, that's something different, right? And so some of that is just our brain, but we have to learn to push back, or otherwise people would never ride on a roller coaster.
Making the implicit, like, oh, yeah. I'm finding my heart beating faster now. Let me just calm down. Self-talk will probably help.
Yes, right. What can I do to save this place without making children fearful just because I have the fear? Right. And so I think all of those aspects of teaching or facilitating, whichever term you want to use. I like facilitator.
Yeah, it is. I like the word.
Yeah, need to be a skill set that future educators are provided.
Yes.
Which is, I think, what these Porch play chats are helping us with. Now, I do that in my classroom, my college classroom with my students, but I think it's what would happen if that is fearful. So that's why they want their structure, right?
Yeah.
I want to know. And we always say children need a consistent and predictable routine, but then we get into major structure, which instead of being predictable.
Yeah, and I think with disabilities that happens even more. And I think I'm the parent of an autistic teenager now, but I think a lot of parents with children with disabilities will go through a stage where it's like you want that control of like, wait, how do I make them the same as everyone else in the classroom, or how do I know what's going to happen? And part of it, I think it's probably true of any parent, but like you realize at some point that you actually can't control your children. I only have the one child, so I can only say, you know, that's what happened. But I think, but that idea in the classroom, it's the same thing. Of the children are never going to do what you think they are. And when you can get over that fear, and maybe disabilities, because we also have a socialization where we don't mention those things otherwise. Even, I mean, I'll just, like, even the idea that non-disabled people tend to use this language where it's like a person with, you know, like the person first language. And yet most people with disabilities, oh, there I go using it, most disabled people prefer language where, you know, the word is right there. And part of some of the reading I've done, people have talked about putting it later because you want to see the person first, makes it sound like the disability is something that you're trying not to see. You know, right? So it's the same thing of like, oh, I don't see color, right? I didn't notice you were black, right? Just
right. Which is great.
And it's sort of like, oh, I didn't, oh, someone who's blind. Person who's blind. It's like, well, no, that I'm a blind person and it's okay. It's okay to be blind. It's okay to use a wheelchair. It's almost like we're using that language because we're uncomfortable with it, rather than showing like, get comfortable with it, you know? And so that's definitely something that I find myself, you know, trying to get used. Identity first language is usually how it's referred. Unless, you know, if a particular person doesn't want it, obviously I use the language they want.
Right. And I think it's all about, you know, we've been drilled into what's politically correct, which is fine, because I think that's opened our awareness to the language that we were using that was disrespectful. Right.
And that's, yeah. And that's true too, because some of the words that were used, which I won't use here, but.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I, you know, I go back, you know, because I'm older than dirt. I go back to the first time, and I was a child with extensive burns. I was burned when I was 5. So 60% of my body was burned and 40% of that was 3rd-degree burn. So I had to like rebuild everything, right? In plastic surgery, you know, 11 years, 3 times a year. But so I was the last one to be picked on the baseball team. Not that people didn't like me, but because I couldn't run fast. And I certainly couldn't hit the ball, right? So anyway, but it's those kinds of, it's that discomfort. So I remember seeing my very first person who was in a wheelchair, and I went, you know, running up to them. My mother almost had she was like, don't stare. And I said, they're in a wheelchair. I couldn't walk for a while either. I want to talk to them. And it was interesting because that's before they had the sidewalk cuts, you know, where people who were disabled were hidden, right? And so that's the generation when I was young that was present. And I think that it's that kind of discomfort that was instilled in us. Don't stare, that's rude. Don't stare. When people were staring at me all the time, and fortunately children would come up and say, what happened to you? And I would say, oh, when I was little, blah, 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 blah. And they would say, oh, I bet that hurt. And I said, well, I don't remember much about it, but you know, sometimes I have to do blah, blah. And it made it more acceptable, right, to them.
Yeah. Well, I remember, I used to have my preschool class visit a nursing home every month. And there's this one guy in a wheelchair with one leg. And I don't know, it was like the next school year. So a new crew of kids was visiting, and it had been a few months. So the kids knew that, but I remember the one kid just looked at it, John, what happened to your leg? Where'd it go? And it was that thing of like, I had that same feeling inside.
Oh my God, right,
God. Even though the whole point was we're getting used to being around people. You can ask about their wheelchair. How does it work? How do you know, and all that. And yet I was like, oh, and the guy just started laughing and just said, I had a big hour. But it was the thing that I realized then, like, I've never asked him,
Right.
you
You
know,
were-
and I've known him for like 3 years now. And,
Yeah.
you know, I would have asked in a different way than a 4-year-old, but still it was, you know, it's usually the parents of the child or the teacher who get worried about what, you know, what's going to happen.
Instead of, you know, it's pretty obvious that he had lost a limb, right?
Right. And he knows it. It's not a surprise to him.
So I think what we need to be focused on is the including part of this Porch Play Chat and the strategies that you've already given just based on the example that we started with earlier.
Right.
In challenging our discomfort.
Yeah. So if we want to include people, we have to challenge our discomfort, facilitate engagement. If a child is just watching or is poking at someone, find out if they want to join. Are they not knowing how to join? There is one thing also that's common. It's actually research-wise, it's considered an effective way. They refer to it as peer modeling, which is a term I will not use because that's the idea that one peer is more. You know, like in that case with the kid playing that game, the child telling the rules would be modeling, but truly it's their play partners is what I call them.
Yes, I like that much better.
But sometimes you have to sort of say, hey, we're going to start our playtime in our partner. So, you know, you two are going to play together. You two are going to play together. And that's, you know, about as directive as, like, I feel a little uncomfortable about how directive it is. And yet what I find is the kids have to be sort of in a situation where they're going to attune to each other. So you might do it in a different way, but still something where you get them together long enough where they learn like how to talk to each other, how to integrate, like, because frankly, if a child's looking for someone to play with, it's like, I'm not sure how the wheelchair will work over here. So I'll go ask this child instead, right? So they do the same thing that adults might do, is like, and if they just learn to ask, problem solve, things like that. So I do want to just throw that one out as another type of engagement that we didn't mention, just because depending on the different abilities in your classroom, that might be one that is really going to help, because otherwise the children might not ever
interact.
And I find that if you just say, oh, we're going to start playtime that way, and then, you know, sort of help facilitate at least like a few minutes. And then after a few days of that, usually it's like, you know, within 2 weeks, the kids are already finding out who they can play with. And
I think the other big piece that you said that should happen anyway sometimes in classrooms where children segregate themselves. You know, the boys are going to play over here and the girls are going to play over here, or the children of color are going to play over here and the children who are white are going to play. I've seen that in adult classrooms, right? And so I think making people experience that I'm going to select occasionally,
right,
in order to build relationships and that modeling that we
and sometimes you can find other ways to sort of scaffold to have children play, but not always, you know.
Not always. Sometimes it has to be more directive. And so if a teacher is going to be direct, you know, adult directed learning, maybe this is a much better choice than how many children are going to play in that center and who they are and how often they're going to rotate, right? So
I didn't think about that other way.
Those direct teacher moments we still struggle with in many classrooms. So as always, you know, we can go on and talk forever. So but I'm going to close this up. Don't go anywhere, because I have a couple other things to talk to you about. So let me finish up. So to learn more about Porch Play Chats or IPA-USA, please visit our website at IPAUSA.org. And until next time, thanks for listening.